I'm going to be talking to you about courage as we finish up our series talking about the unseen. Again, the things that we've talked about in this series are things you don't see with your eyes. Again, you can't go to the grocery store and buy courage. You can't go to a car dealership and buy courage. You can't purchase this. These are the things that we don't see with our eyes. We see the results of them oftentimes, but we don't see them with our eyes. These traits or character traits themselves. And so as we talk about courage, there's a lot of different angles we could talk about with regard to courage. And, everything from what courage means and what it looks like and all that. But I've chosen today to actually go in the direction of talking about how we might achieve courage, how we might personally put that into our world, into our lives. And so I want you to just be aware of the memory verse. It's a great verse. It's one to kind of plug away into your heart, into your mind. And I'll really be honest with you, the psalm that we're going to look at this morning, we're going to walk through this psalm, is one that I would encourage you to actually put to memory. And I was thinking about that this morning. I was going, Rod, have you memorized this psalm? I have not memorized the entire psalm. I'm very familiar with it, and there are certain parts of it that I'd say I've committed to memory. But I got to thinking myself and thinking, this is a psalm probably everyone as a believer, including myself, all of us really ought to put to memory, because there are some things said in here that have the possibility of making a huge difference in your world every day. And so I don't think courage is reserved for great moments. It often is exhibited in great moments. But I believe we're called to live a life of courage every day. Courage oftentimes is, as I said, is unseen. It's not visible. But whenever the effects of it are seen, the only reason we're able to have courage in it is because we've been people who have developed courage. So this is about how do you go down the pathway of developing courage in your life. And it's written by David, King David. It also, there's varying opinions about what context it was that he wrote it from. But what we do know is he was feeling the intensity of some oppression in his life. We do know that he was needing to dig down deep and grab a hold of what we call courage. And so let's go ahead and just dive into this. And if you'll grab your sheet beside you, we're going to really just walk through the psalm. And so if you look at Psalm 27, verses 1 to 3, it says this: "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the defense of my life. Whom shall I dread? When evildoers come upon me to devour my flesh, my adversaries and my enemies, they stumbled and fell. Though a host encamp against me, my heart will not fear. Though war arise against me, in spite of this, I shall be confident." Now, there's some words I'd kind of like for you to circle in the verses there. The words, my light, or underline them, whichever works best for you. My light, my salvation, the defense, the Lord is my defense, or the defense of my life. And then on down, the people who came against them stumbled and fell. They stumbled and fell. My heart will not fear. I shall be confident. Those are some key phrases that I just want to kind of point out. And I want to start with, first of all, we get on the pathway to encouragement when the Lord is my light. When the Lord is your light, this is the beginning of the pathway to courage. And light has many connotations to it, and I looked up what it might mean originally just in the context here. And in general, it means at least these basic things, okay? And that is, light brings comfort to us. In other words, if you're in a situation where you say, I need courage, well, we need to feel like we have some comfort, or we have someone, something that gives us a sense of well-being. And I don't know if Motel 6 still does, I'll leave the light on for you or whatever, but there's a lot of symbology in leaving the light on. In other words, you welcome home. You want to feel like you walk into a warm, comfortable environment. So the Lord is the one who brings me comfort. He is my light. He is one who I feel comfort. I get comfort from being with him. But a light gives you guidance. I don't know about you, but this is Georgia, and I grew up in South Florida. And in South Florida, if you went out in the backyard, you might, where I lived, it was possible that you might encounter a rattlesnake or an alligator. Now, honestly, I never saw an alligator in my backyard, but I did see them cross the road sometimes, and there are a whole lot more of them there than there used to be because they've been so protected. And so my relatives that still live down there, they see a lot more of them than I did growing up. So if you went out in your backyard, unless you just really liked, getting rattlesnake bitten or playing with alligators, you took a flashlight. And so I don't feel so threatened here in Georgia, but I have seen a snake or two in my backyard. And so when I go to get the dog or do something out there at dark, we have a flashlight right in the right place because we want to be able to see where we're walking when we're back there. Light guides us. It gives us guidance. There's something else about light. And so God is our light. We're in his presence. It's comforting. He gives us direction. He shows us a path to follow. And there's something else about light. It's convicting. Because, if you notice, light reveals things. It shows up stuff. And so, the Bible talks all about light and darkness. And here's something I need to tell you about light and darkness. And I think you already know it, but I'm going to remind you of it this morning. And that is, wherever light is, darkness isn't. And if there is, and light reveals what was hidden by the darkness. Those are two truths we have to remember. Light reveals what's hidden by the darkness, and where light is, darkness can't be. And so when you see, the psalmist is saying, the Lord is my light. It means I can clearly see what's going on in my life. I can clearly observe what's happening here. And so, in a sense, it has a purifying effect with us. And so it brings us comfort, being in his presence, the light of it. He is my light. He gives us guidance, and it also can convict us or show us what we need to fix. And so, when the Lord is our light, it goes on to say, we're on his pathway to courage. When the Lord is my light, when he is my salvation, when he is my only hope. You think about it today. If you think about, what do you put your hope in? Maybe your rich uncle. I'm just so glad I have a rich uncle. Well, let me tell you something about rich uncles. Most of the time, you're not in their will, okay? But, if you are, that's great, that's wonderful. But you might want to think about, some people hope in the lottery, and some people hope in, hope in a relationship. We were just talking about that with this divorce care thing. Sometimes you put all your hope in that. Put all your hope in a job. All your hope. There's so many things that we can, put our hope in, and there's nothing wrong with some of those things. But if that is truly our hope, then we place our hope in the wrong thing. Because really, God is our salvation. And the psalmist is saying, there's a lot of things I might have. King David's writing this. I might have a military that I can count on. I might have this. I might have that. I might have the other. I might have servants take care of things. But my salvation is in the Lord. The Lord is my light. The Lord is my salvation. He's my only hope. He's the one who can deliver. He's the one who can rescue. And I want you to think carefully about this in your own life, especially kind of in light of the music this morning. You know what? God is the one who rescues us. Tim was saying all of us here have been rescued. All of us have been rescued. If you're a follower of God, you've been rescued. And the awesome thing about that is that's the business God is in. He created the whole world. He's there's all these majestic things that God has done and can do and will do. But the most critical thing to us, and I believe to him, is his salvation, his rescue of us. And so the psalmist is going, the Lord is my light and my salvation. In other words, he is the only one I can count on. He is the only one I place my hope in. And you know what I've noticed? I've noticed over life that sometimes as believers, we do put our hope not only in things and but sometimes we put our hope in people. And let me tell you something about people. I don't care if it's the Pope. I don't care if it's Billy Graham. I don't care who it is. People are people. And people mess up. And if you put your hope in people, you know what you will live your life? You'll live your life disappointed. Because people will disappoint you. You say, well, I want to be able to believe in people. Well, and we should, and we hope we can. But you know what? Don't put them as your salvation. Don't bank anything about your salvation on another person. And because salvation comes through God alone. He is our salvation. Nothing else is our salvation. God alone is. So when the Lord is my light, when he is my salvation, he's my only hope, I'm on the pathway to courage, but also when the Lord is the strength of my life. It's the strength of my life. Let's look at verse 2 and 3 again. It says, when evildoers come upon me to devour my flesh, and I don't know for sure, but it's possibility that he might have in that point been talking about whenever he was a shepherd boy, and there were animals that came to literally devour his flesh. They stumbled and fell. And we know he is a pretty mean shot with that slingshot, so I don't know whether he's talking about them, talking about Goliath, talking about, he had so many obstacles in his world, he could have been talking about any one of those. Though a host encamp against me, and as king he had many of those, my heart will not fear. That's saying, that's kind of braggadocio, it's almost like bold, that's bold. Though war rise against me, in spite of this, I shall be confident. Why is he confident? Why is he saying, I will not fear? It could be because he's foolish. It could be because he's developing courage. I would say it's because he's developing courage. How do we get that courage? It's by a massive confidence in who God is. It's not trusting in your own skill, your own ability to manage, to handle life, to handle things. It's trusting in God's supernatural ability to redeem us, to set us on the right path, and to help us do what only he can do in our lives. Now, I believe, and I believe I'm not the only one around here, but I get this story from Kevin Myers, who pastors 12 Stone in Atlanta. I know I refer to him fairly often, but it's because he's had a pretty good imprint on my own mind and heart. And he tells the story of when he was, when 12 Stone was beginning. For many, many years, the church, they called themselves a Heinz 57 church because they had 57 people in attendance for many, many years. They couldn't break, this is 57, always 57. I mean, the average always ended up being 57. So they're going, we're Heinz 57. Well, Kevin, he came from a setting where just as a young man in his very early 20s, just out of college, he and a friend that he had grown up with, who was just a few years older than he was, had walked into a church that had been planted and started by a guy who was a part of InterVarsity Christian Ministries, and the guy went back into InterVarsity full time, and so he turned the church over to these young guys, and they just had this like rocket ride of growth. The thing just exploded. And so Kevin went to Atlanta, took a team with him down to Atlanta, and he was confident he would just walk into Atlanta and things would explode. But instead of exploding, he ended up with a Heinz 57 church. And a whole team that came with him had gone back to Michigan. And so he was at a point where he was ready to throw in the towel. So he went back to this guy that he served with in Michigan, Grand Rapids, Michigan. He went back to him and he said to him, I'm quitting. I'm applying for a job at your church. I'm not going to do this any longer. I am not cut out for this. I can't do this. Wayne Schmidt listened to him and looked at him and he said, Kevin, I do believe you've been called to do this, and I do believe that you can do it, but you seem to be lacking faith. I'm going to ask you to borrow faith from me. I'm going to loan you faith because I believe in what you went to do. I believe. And after some discussion, Kevin agreed to go borrow his faith and to go back on the faith that Wayne had in him and try again. Well, many, many years later, And size is not the litmus test of everything. But instead of being a Heinz 57 church, they run average about 14,000 on weekends now. And at that pivotal moment, Kevin would have quit if he had not been able to borrow faith from a trusted friend. And I need to tell you that we get strength, the strength of life, God being the strength of our life. If you feel entirely depleted, I want you to come and see me, and unless you're just haywire crazy, I can't, and I'm just go, you know what? I don't blame you for what, unless it's just like whacked out. Here's what I want to tell you. I am willing. It's easier for me to believe for you most of the time than it is for me anyway, okay? So I'll hear your story and I'll be going, man, this is not a problem. Borrow some of my faith. And here's what I want to encourage you to do with everybody. You know somebody who's discouraged, who's down and out, loan them some faith, loan them some hope. Be a person who breathes life into other people, who breathes hope, breathes faith, breathes confidence, breathes encouragement into other people. That's what God does to us. David's not standing here and going, well, I've thought this through, and I'm just good enough to do it. I can do this thing. He wasn't being some kind of a redneck renegade. He wasn't doing that. He's going, you know what? I'm not afraid, and I'm going to be confident. Because you know why? Because the Lord is the defense of my life. The Lord is my strength. That's what I'm banking on. And so if you want courage, you can go anywhere you want to get, but I'm just going to tell you, the best place to begin the journey, the pathway to courage, is when the Lord is your light, when the Lord is your salvation, He's your only hope, and when He is the strength of your life. And if you feel weak as water, borrow some. Borrow some from someone else near you, around you. Come to me, whatever it might be. Now let's go on to the next section of Scripture, and that is the pathway to courage is not only when the Lord is our light, salvation, strength, but when His presence is where I want to dwell. There's a key word here, I want to dwell. It has to be some desire here. It has to be something where you want this. And then also where I find protection. And let me read these verses to you, Psalm 27, verses 4 to 6. Man, I really have always liked this psalm, but I'm really liking this psalm this week. I mean, once actually I landed up on it later in the week than what I would have even hoped for this morning. But it has been just like going off like alarms in my mind. It says, one thing I have asked from the Lord, that I shall seek. When you hear someone say, I'm going to ask one thing, and that's what I'm going to seek out. One thing, you're kind of expecting that this would be the big kahooey here. This is a big deal. And so what was this big deal? He says, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to meditate in His temple. Now, some of you might be sitting here and thinking, wow, so he just quit being king and went and sat over in the temple and just sat there and, hummed dirges and meditated and, that's what he did. No, that's not what that means. What it means, that temple, the tabernacle, represents the presence of God. What he's saying is, I want to dwell in God's presence. And he goes, I'm going to seek it out. When they asked the Lord, that I shall seek. I'm going to be diligent about it. I am going to pursue being in the presence of God. That's where I want to live. I want to live in the presence of God. It's a wonderful thing for us to come together as we on Sunday morning, and I hope somewhere, every Sunday morning, somewhere in the place, in the service, somewhere it's a prayer, a song, the message, something gives you a glimpse of the presence of God. There's a reality in your spirit, in your heart, in your mind. God is real. He's real, and He becomes real to you. It doesn't matter if no one else in the world around you got that. You got it. God is real, and I know today He revealed Himself to me in a real way. I hope you sense His presence, that you would be there. But I also hope you really sense His presence all day, every day. He said, I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life. He didn't say, just when I go over for a worship service, or just here, or just there, or just when I'm in a desperate place, that all the days of my life I would dwell in the presence of God. And then when his presence is where I want to dwell, when his presence is where I find protection, it says, for in the day of trouble, he will conceal me in his tabernacle. When I was a young boy, my dad was a pastor, and all of the years that I knew him, he was killed at age 39 in a car accident by a drunk driver. And I was with him in the accident. It seemed to be kind of a thing, and I've said this maybe before, I used to think for years and years and years, kind of up until I had kids, I guess, that I was my dad's pet. And so, because it seemed like every time he traveled or went someplace, I went with him. And so, part of the reason why I was with him in that accident, he did speaking engagements, many other places besides the church he pastored, and he was on one of those, and I was with him. And so, but up through my 10th year, I spent a lot of time with my dad. I was very close to him. And any time that there was, when he was not up front speaking, and this was in the days before children's church, and so whether church was for kids or not, kids were there. And you figured out some way to get engaged or do something, you know. And so I would, when my dad would be seated on the front row, I would always either be, if I knew he was going to be seated more or some through the service, I would always go sit right where he would be seated. And my poor dad, he had to wear a suit every time he preached. So he always had a suit jacket on, a coat. And so I would oftentimes take his coat jacket and put it around me, and I would sit inside there. And I would and I would then go through his pockets, you know. It was kind of interesting. I don't even know if they make these anymore, but he had these little things called Sen, I think, that were like breath mints or something, and they tasted awful, but I'd still poke around there and get one and stick it in my mouth. But I can remember to this day when I would be seated there inside his coat jacket on the front seat of that church, that I felt, not that I was even afraid or something like that, but there was a feeling that would come over me that was I felt the most secure, the most comfortable, the most at peace, most protected, you know, just everything. It was like a perfect kind of experience for me. And there's been many, many times over the years when I've had to come to God and say, God, I need to kind of get under your coat jacket here. I need to sense your protective arm around me. I need you to conceal me in your tabernacle, in your presence. I need to be right there up against you, to know I'm not in this alone, to know that I'm not by myself, to know that I'm in your presence. And I want to tell you that God is a faithful God. He said he would be a father to the fatherless. My mom prayed that prayer many times. There have been many, many times over the years when I've literally felt as though just as I had that same sense as a kid in the protection and the care of my father, that I felt that care and protection of my heavenly Father. I don't ever sense that he was like, well, I'm kind of busy right now. Could you come back later and see if we can do the coat thing and all that? You know, it was like he would take me under his wing and hold me there, and he would conceal me in his tabernacle. He would hold me close in his presence. That will develop courage in your heart, my friends. Number 3, or the next section. The pathway to courage is when the Lord is my light, my salvation, my strength, when his presence is the place I want to dwell, the place that I find protection. And the pathway to courage is when my desire is to seek God. First of all, I'm going to go ahead and fill in these blanks for you. Then we'll look at the scripture. To seek God, to be accepted by God, to learn God's ways, and for God to defend me. These are all our desire. When my desire is to seek God, to be accepted by God, to learn God's ways, and for God to defend me. Let's look at these scriptures found in verses 7 to 12. Hear, O Lord, when I cry with my voice, and be gracious to me and answer me. When you say, seek my face, my heart said to you, your face, O Lord, I shall seek. Do not hide your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger. You have been my help. Do not abandon me nor forsake me, O God of my salvation. For my father and my mother have forsaken me, but the Lord will take me up. Teach me your way, O Lord, and lead me in a level path because of my foes. Do not deliver me over to the desire of my adversaries, for false witnesses have risen against me, and such as breathe out violence. Now, I want to break this down just a little bit. When our desire is to seek God, and David is saying, hear me when I cry out. And you said, seek my face. And I'm telling you, Lord, I am seeking your face. I am seeking you. Do not hide your face from me. I'm going to tell you, God's not interested in hiding his face from us. He's not. Because he's a God of redemption, a God of salvation. But there are times, I think, when we can feel like his face is against us, when he's turned his face away from us. Now, let me just say this. Don't ask God to bless things in your life you know he's not going to bless. Because he won't, just because he has his face towards you redemptively, doesn't mean he's going to, any more than you would your child who's doing something rebellious and wrong in front of you, that you would go, you're just the best kid I've ever, you're my pet. I just love you for, you love them, but you're disappointed in what they're doing, and you might even bring some discipline to them. So, but God's face is toward us, whether he's disciplined, whether his love is being demonstrated in discipline, whether his love is being demonstrated in just joy. His face is toward us. I had an experience with Hunter, and I know I need to pay him for sermon illustrations, but anyway, the other night I was wrestling with him, and he takes Skylar. You wrestle with her, she's asleep in like 2 minutes max. I mean, she'll even in mid-sentence, she just goes out, boom. And so I always wrestle with her because that's the easy one first, and then I go to Hunter and because he gets real chatty, and that's fine, but sometimes it's like 30 minutes later, man, you got to go to sleep. So there are times whenever I've thought, I think if I just, instead of laying here flat on my back, and I'm just listening, we're talking, he's asking me all these like wild hair questions about the universe and God and everything else he can think of, which is great, and I enjoy those times, but every once in a while it's like, we got to get sleep. So I will get on my side with my back to him, just hoping, that I've got a big enough back he can kind of cozy up there and just it'll put him right to sleep, Heat waves will put him out. And so the other night I did that, and I've done it many times. He got up from where he was, and he came around to the other side, and he laid down. I said, what are you doing? He said, I want you to have your face toward me. And I said, well, she says, that so you can talk my leg off or what, But it was, he didn't like the idea that my back was to him, my head was facing away from him, and I was trying to do that and get him to quit talking, And so he wouldn't go back to sleep, so I turned my face back toward him. And I just, he likes to imagine all the things that might happen during the night anyway, and, what would you do if someone came in the house, Dad? What would you do? He'd say, well, you don't know what I would want to do to them or whatever if they were threatening us. But anyway, so we have those talks on. So I think it's like, as long as Dad's looking at me and he's, got his face toward me, I think I can go on to sleep and figure things will be okay. So is your desire to seek God? Do you want his face towards you? Do you want him looking into your life, looking into you? Is your desire to be accepted by God? He says, don't abandon me. The psalmist says, you're my God, you're the God of salvation. Don't abandon me or forsake me. My mother and father have forsaken me. There's different ways you can look at that. You can look at it as literally sometimes people are forsaken by their mother and father. Sometimes we grow to the point where our age-wise, where our parents are gone. They've gone on. They're not here anymore. Or we just reach a point in their life where honestly, they can't do much to help us. We're kind of out here, we're on our own. We got to take care of it ourselves. And so whether it meant an actual rejection or an actual, it doesn't matter, because all those experiences are true. Whether you feel that or you just feel abandoned in the sense that you're not a kid anymore. You got to face the realities of it. But he's saying this, he's expressing this emotion. Do not abandon me or forsake me, O God of my salvation, for my mother and father have forsaken me, but the Lord will take me up. Do you desire acceptance by God? He wants to accept you, and he does accept you, but he also wants to change you. When my desire is also, you're getting courage when you're seeking God, when you're seeking to be accepted by him, when you're learning God's ways. He says, teach me your way, O Lord. I've had periods in my life, I've had days, I've had times in my life whenever I felt like I was really trying to help God understand what he needed to do. You know, things weren't working out or whatever, and I'm just like, God, you got to get with the program. Where things aren't working out so well, you need to get with the program. This is our program. Don't forget. It seems like you're ignoring the program. You're not going with the program. And you know what I found? He's never going to go with my program. Not because he's tough, not because he's mean, not because he's angry, but because his way's the right way. So David says, teach me your way, oh God. What is our posture? What is our attitude toward God? Is our posture saying, God, you show me the way? Or are we saying, over here, here's what I got planned. Now see, make sure you get this figured out, God, because I'm on a deadline here with this, and you gotta fix it. And I hope you're laughing with me, not at me, okay? Because that would make me feel better. No, I know. We do this, don't we? We need to have a desire to learn God's ways. Not my way, God's ways. And then when our desire is for God to defend us. Do not deliver me over to the desire of my adversaries, for false witnesses have risen against me, and such as breathe out violence. And then we'll pick up from there in just a moment, but I want to say this. Do you know that God can do a much greater job of defending you than you can yourself? There's something in all of us that wants to defend ourselves so bad. I have two brothers who are pastors. They're wonderful men. One of them is 4 years older than I am. One's 4 years younger than I am. And we endeavor to use our experiences to encourage one another, to lift each other up, and to pray for each other, and to just be there for each other as much as we can, even though we're in separate locations and those kinds of things. And my oldest brother, who's always been a strong leader and is today, always a strong person. I guess it's been probably about 3 years ago, went into one of the greatest challenges in ministry that I've ever personally watched somebody go through. And I was actually occasionally going down and helping them with a certain couple of ministries that they, just in a sense of advising them some in a couple of areas. And so I happened to be around him a little bit more. And during that time, there was a person who was morally corrupt, and but instead of admitting that or taking that, my brother had to deal with that as a staff member, had to deal with it on a private situation, and that person decided to turn it into something very different than that. So it just became a really, really hard road for quite a while. And sometimes I told my brother, I said, you know what? I'm going to deal with it, okay? I'm going to go take care of this myself. Now, in my most human moments, you'd probably come and visit me in prison or something, because this person was really unscrupulous in what they were doing, and it just was like the face of evil. And I watched my brother for the last 2.5, 3 years be under some of the most unbelievable spiritual warfare and personal attack and persecution that I've ever personally seen. And in and through all of that, I watched him hold his tongue and choose not to defend himself and to choose not to do battle other than whatever means were necessary in order to respond appropriately. And today, within the last few months, there's been this significant turnaround of events. And today he's been able to bear some of the fruit of that perseverance and allowing God to be the avenger instead of him taking things in his own hands. Now, I'm going to tell you, it is not easy to do that. It was very hard as a brother to not do that, even in his behalf. But I want to tell you that God knows how to deal with people. It's not always in our time frame. It's not always in the way that we would see it. And we may not always look good in the moment. But the reality is, truth wins. Truth wins. And sometimes there's damage done, but truth wins. Is it your desire for God to defend you? Or do you feel a desire to take it in your own hands? Number 4, the last one. Having the faith to believe that God will bring about good, having the faith to wait for God's timing. I want to read these last 2 verses for you, and really these are the key verses. All this other is the pathway to it. Here it is. I would have despaired unless I had believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. I would have despaired unless I had believed I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Key phrase there, I believed. He didn't say, I would have despaired except I saw how good God was doing and what all he was doing. No, I believed I would see it. Verse 14, wait for the Lord, be strong and let your heart take courage. Yes, wait for the Lord. I'm going to say one thing personally and then give you a closing comment. Verse 13 has been a very, very real verse to me. A couple times, particularly in my life. Where I literally felt like the dark clouds of heaviness were so deep and so dark over me and around me and in the circumstances personally in my own life, in my family, that if I had not believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, I would have given up. It was the faith in God's ability to show himself strong that held me steady. And really the only thing that held me steady. And in one of those instances, I had to wait up to 4 years for a situation to be able to see how God in his goodness was going to work it out. And I'm going to tell you, that was not an easy 4 years. And it's because I didn't have control. I didn't have control of the situation. It wasn't something I could control. It was out of my control. And so as a result, you don't know. All I knew was that I would see the hand of God in the land of the living, the place where I live. I just didn't know how for 4 long years. And I'm going to tell you, that's not easy. That's not hard. I mean, it's very hard. And if it wasn't for some scriptures like this, I would have despaired. And then verse 14, wait for the Lord, be strong and let your heart take courage. Yes, wait for the Lord. This is my closing comment, and I want you to listen carefully. Having the inner strength to do the right thing, in other words, courage, having the inner strength to do the right thing and the patience to wait for the right time. You want to know what I believe courage is? That's it. having the inner strength to do the right thing and the patience to wait for the right time. That's courage. It takes courage to act. It takes courage to wait. Jesus